This week, we talk with Thomas Hatch from SaltStack. In the news segment, SCP clients get files that they really didn't want. We meet the confluence of path traversal and RCE, compiled code gets sanitized and sandboxed, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 58, recorded April 22nd, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with Matt Alderman, who's a familiar face on ASW, as well as Business Security Weekly.
Morning.
Morning, Matt. Hey, we've also got John Kinsella, who's here as a co-host for the show.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, John.
I'm here with my furry friend as well, so he might stick his head in occasionally.
Always a good addition to the crew. Register for our upcoming webcast with ServiceNow by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you have missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Attending KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Europe 2019 in Barcelona, May 20th to 23rd, 2019. Join your peers at the Cloud Native Transformation Summit 2019, hosted by Sysdig on May 20th. Our very own Matt Alderman will be emceeing the event. Pre-registration is required. You can add it on during your KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con registration. Our guest today is Thomas Hatch. Thomas is the creator of the Salt open source software project and the CTO of SaltStack, the company behind Salt. He has spent his career writing software to orchestrate and automate the work of securing and maintaining enterprise IT infrastructure from core data center systems to the very edge of the network and IoT. Thomas built fully automated, secure IT environments for the U.S. intelligence community, in addition to decades of experience implementing global infrastructures for the largest businesses in the world. Thomas's knowledge and hands-on experience with dozens of new and old infrastructure management technologies helped establish the vision for SaltStack. He has shared his knowledge of IT security management automation with tens of thousands of practitioners at more than 100 industry events. Thomas and SaltStack have been recognized with numerous awards, ranging from open source community growth to innovation in automation and cybersecurity. For his work on Salt, in 2012, Tom received the Black Duck Rookie of the Year award and was named to the GitHub Octoverse list in both 2012 and 2013 for leading a project with the highest number of unique contributors, sharing the designation with projects from Android, Mozilla, and OpenStack. More recently, SaltStack SecOps was chosen by CISO Magazine as one of the hottest new products at RSA Conference 2019. Hey, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, so on the surface, topics like asset inventory and configuration management, they seem pretty straightforward. They're simple to say, but perhaps not easy to do. So since these are eternal challenges for DevOps teams, what is making this so hard? And do we have a future ahead of us where this becomes easier in any way?
I like that question because it is something that's really hard and it is something that's really difficult. One of the things that continually fascinates me is how often we still run into infrastructures that don't even know what they have, let alone how it's being managed and how it's being maintained. And so when we come back in and look at how to also add security onto those components, the level of complexity that we have to deal with gets significantly high.
Yeah, I think even just, someone trying to maintain their home network of 10 systems, that already gets hard. But then we start to talk about thousands to tens of thousands. So when you're looking at lots of infrastructure, can you give us a sense of the orders of magnitude of the systems you see, both in amount and distribution?
Yeah, sure. I've worked with, and we have customers that are managing systems where they have many hundreds of thousands of servers that are all taking care of very distributed and unique tasks. And maintaining those systems and even just keeping track of them becomes an incredibly daunting challenge. And so when we talk about scale, these major infrastructures that are holding our information and maintaining the applications that we use on a day-to-day basis are so large and unwieldy that again, it just becomes nearly impossible to have the visibility that you need into them, which is also what ties back into a lot of what we've been trying to do, is make sure that we have real visibility into what's going on a system, but also the ability to go in and manage and manipulate those systems.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about how Salt does that. So, Salt, I guess, lead us into a little bit of like the basic architecture and how Salt goes to manage all of these systems, or even at the very basics, just how do you connect to and track all of the, 1,000 or 10,000 or more systems?
So when we come back and we look at the management of systems, I feel that the best way to do it is to build a certain type of abstraction over the collection of different types of systems that we need to interact with. The abstraction that we have inside of SaltStack is that we take the system or the device that we're dealing with, and we break it down really into three fundamental concepts. And that is that you need to be able to manage the flow of a system. You need to be able to make changes on the fly. You need to be able to ask questions of all of your distributed system on the fly. You also need to manage the state of that system, which is where configuration management generally comes in. You need to be able to enforce that those systems are running configurations and software that are consistent and can be easily automated in how they're deployed. And then the last piece that we have is the events of the system. And so that we can take things that are happening on those systems, aggregate them back up, so that we're not just looking at our systems from a top-down view. When we have that type of abstraction, then it becomes very easy for us to solve much more complicated problems. A lot of the reason why I'm talking to you today has to do with this new SecOps product that we've come out with. Since we have the ability to view, assess, and manage the state of a system, and we also have the ability to manage the flow of those systems, to be able to communicate with them on the fly, we can send scans out that give us a very robust view of not only the assets which a company has, but also whether they're compliant or what sorts of vulnerabilities exist inside of that infrastructure. But the big difference here is that since we're built on an infrastructure management platform, it becomes very, very easy for us to also ship with the remediation, the mechanism in a completely automated way to ensure that those systems are secure.
That's pretty compelling. So it's one thing for a CISO or for a DevOps team to just to say, yeah, I know where the problems are, or you don't have to tell me where all the problems are. At least they say that for, following the 80/20 rule. But being able to
Right.
remediate, that's pretty interesting, and be able to actually, improve configurations up to compliance. Um, that to me is where the piques my interest to be able to say, wow, you can actually make my day easier with a tool like this.
Yeah,
So
really the goal sorry to interrupt.
no, go ahead, please.
I was going to say a lot of that goal is that when we look at securing an infrastructure and setting up a real defensive posture, what we want to be able to do is ensure that you know that your entire infrastructure is something that you're aware of, but also something that is secure within a reasonable window. As a CISO, you need to be able to know, hey, when's the last time I was in such a secure state across my entire infrastructure, and how short can I make that window? The goal that we're pushing is that we can have the software that makes maintaining the security compliance window to be very small, even in the order of hopefully down to a few days.
Yeah, I think that's one of those themes is, if we want to call it agile or whatever, just being able to have a feedback loop that you can react to quickly. So any tool like this comes to that aid very quickly and should hit a high priority. Um, want to touch on a couple things. So there's always a naive understanding of security tools. Often is we've just moved our threat model from a Jenkins or some other type of configuration management or deployment system into security tooling. So can we talk a little bit about how we secure the security itself, who's watching the watcher, so that we know that we're talking to different systems in a secure manner and that we can not introduce more tools that become a single point of security failure?
Well, a lot of what we're trying to do is to make it so that you don't have to have as many tools. One of the things that makes it very difficult when it comes to watching the watchers is how much you have to watch.
Hmm.
Numerous of our customers have come back and stated that using SaltStack and Salt's technologies, they've been able to use fewer security tools overall. We've also gone through numerous security audits with our own software stack with many of the financial and insurance institutions that use us on a daily basis. And so that's one of the big benefits that we run into. The other thing about our platform is that we ship with very, very granular role-based access controls, which mean that despite the fact that we create a really, really powerful command and control infrastructure, one of the things that we're able to do is also restrict people's access on a very granular level. So as an example of, I think, what you're asking around watchers and the people who are looking for security issues and the people that are mitigating them. When we come back and we look at our platform, we allow for the security team to have very specific roles in how they are defining and scanning infrastructure, but still to have those roles separated from the infrastructure team who is still actually executing all of the automation that we ship with. But even then, both teams are able to maintain a complete visibility as to what's going on, so that you are able to create a check and balance in both directions. A lot of what we want to do to facilitate, again, what you're talking about, the watchers being watched, is to enable better collaboration between security development and operations teams through tools that bridge the functional gaps between their jobs.
Yeah, and so talking about that scanning aspect as well, what are some of those examples of things that on the security team could start looking for so that they can then collaborate with the others to say, here is the latest CVE, for example, or here's a misconfiguration? Yeah, can you give us a bit of sense of what can be found?
Yeah, definitely. So when we come back and we look at the complete SaltStack platform, there's a lot more that you can do than just with our SecOps product, but let me kind of start there. Our SecOps product, which is very, very new, makes it easy as we ship with scans that manage everything from CIS style, secure configurations, all the way through different general security aspects of your infrastructure. And so that becomes our really easy high-level interface that we've got presented today. But as we kind of peel back the layers of the onion, Salt has the ability to send out and basically ask your infrastructure virtually any question that you want. And so it's really easy to send a command out that says, hey, tell me what all the software that is currently running on my infrastructure, what all their versions are. It's also easy using this event system that we have to be able to have not just a passive scan, but an active view of what's going on. So we can have events that are triggered when certain configuration files are changed, and then those events can go up into our reactor system. Salt has the ability not only to ingest events that are coming up, but also react to them, since it's all tied together in this remote execution and management platform. So as a system is changed to be not secure, an event can be fired which can immediately tell the system to re-secure it. Or similarly, we have event systems that allow us to even detect if there is anomalous activity, take that back up to our reactor, and immediately change that, boot somebody off of the system. And so that underlying power that we have to be able to take care of these things as they come is quite extensive.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we could do anything from even model and expectations of a what if scenario. Let's say there is another OpenSSL vuln or something like that. We could actually go through and just say how many of these systems are going to be hit. But then even so, on event and reactors that you're describing, we can also then, after the fact, or respond to misconfigurations, mistakes that happen, or even as you're saying, that those anomalous. So this is also not even forward-looking; it's even follow-up and has a great forensics capability to it as well.
Right. When we look at things from a security context, it's the gaps between securing systems where we tend to have most of the difficulty. It's when it's between a CVE comes out and we're actually able to distribute those patches. It's between when we update a system and restart services. But it's also in between our visibilities and in between the scans that we're actually executing. It's one thing to climb a peak, but unless you're always moving forward in securing and enforcing the state of your system, then by the very nature of the industry that we work in, we're moving backwards. And so you have to have that event-driven, alert-based system, as well as being able to scan and remediate.
Yeah, and establishing, I guess putting your team together to climb that peak, if we're going to riff off that, are there particular basic policies or basic configurations that you've seen be more successful than others? For example, you mentioned like CIS before. Are there, do you have a top two or a top three list of just to try to say, here's a good policy to start with. This will get you most of the way, and then you can tweak to within your context of your environment from there.
That's a fantastic question, because the big challenge that we run into is that when we look at infrastructures, no two infrastructures are the same. Now, this is why we present a slightly different approach to how we manage configuration policy in our new SecOps product. So when we look at configuration, we present things such as, again, CIS, STIGs, style benchmarks, but we present a building of those benchmarks to mirror your own company's policy so that the enforcement is policy driven. No one should know better how to secure your infrastructure than the people who are working on your infrastructure. And so having a policy driven approach is one in which we feel that we follow one of the core tenets that I've tried to build into SaltStack from the beginning, which is that we want to give you all of the tools, and we want to give you a lot of sane baseline default choices that have already been made, but also present enough flexibility to solve the complicated problems that you need to deal with inside of an infrastructure. So like you're saying, it's really good to start, and most of our customers and most of the people that I've talked to on the subject come back and they're big fans of CIS, which was why that was the first one that we started on. But then they always need to augment it. And so having that ability to take a policy-driven approach to securing your infrastructure means that we're working towards being able to be fundamentally an expression of your company's policy on securing infrastructure.
Yeah, so Tom, one of the challenges I've seen on the configuration management side is because you have a varying degree of infrastructure. I might have some Windows devices, I might have some Linux or Unix devices. Coming up with a single policy is difficult because there's some abstraction in there, right? Password policies, for example, on Windows are a different set of configuration settings than they are in Linux or Unix, for example. Is there an abstraction that allows you to define the policies at a higher level, but then implements them differently based on the individual types of infrastructure you're managing? Or do you still have to kind of look at these as, for these Windows devices, it's this policy, for these, for Linux and Unix, it's this policy, or can we abstract that up a bit?
So that's an excellent question. Abstracting between very differing platforms can be a very, very serious challenge. Now, SaltStack, we have native controls and native abstractions across Windows, Mac, and all major Linux distributions, as well as Solaris and AIX. And so what happens inside of these infrastructures is that we have a system built in called targeting. Targeting allows us to define what those macro groups are that we need to interface with. And so what we run into is that the policies which are being enforced can vary in very real ways, even between different Linux distributions. Say even between Red Hat 6 and 7, or even between Red Hat and SUSE or Debian or Ubuntu. And so we need to be able to present the abstraction through, again, a targeting interface. The targeting interface that we ship with allows to very, very easily state things like, this target applies to all of our Windows 2019 servers, or this target applies to all of our Windows servers. It's very easy inside of our system to be able to say that this is a policy which functions at a level of Linux operating systems, and here's an extension to that policy which takes care of that difference between what is just a Linux operating system and perhaps between our Red Hat 6 and 7 or our Ubuntu systems.
That's great, because it's super challenging. I mean, a little history. John knows some of this, it being at Qualys now. I mean, I wrote a lot of the policy compliance policies, and it was all, each check varied based on not only the operating system, but the version of the operating system. And that gets really hard to manage in an environment where we're dealing with tens or hundreds of thousands of devices that have various versions, not only of the operating system, but then the versions within those operating systems. So any way to centrally kind of simplify aspects of policy-driven enforcement is great, because I see that as one of the big administrative challenges for most organizations.
No, and it definitely is. And I should probably add to that, that when we look at enforcement across different operating system versions, or even completely different platforms, when we go through, since we're able to use the configuration management systems inside of Salt, it's very easy for us to be able to build a lot of those differences directly into our scans. It's very, very easy to be able to say that, okay, I'm building something that hits a specific target of a Red Hat system, and I can build directly into my scans. If I'm on 6, do this, if I'm on 7, do that, et cetera, and then normalize those responses up. And since the SALT configuration management system that we're using under the hood has the flexibility and has had the flexibility to do that built into it for a long time, then it allows us to create simpler and more abstract targets up above, so that, again, we can compensate for what really is a very complicated problem by dealing with it at multiple layers, at saying, I can make it a little simpler here, I can make it a little simpler here, I can make it a little simpler here. So the end result is an aggregate system that allows you to be able to start to deal with the scale that these modern infrastructures have.
So Tom, it is an interesting choice which you guys have done to actually choose to differentiate yourself by focusing on security, right? You've got a good number of competitors out there that have been pretty successful in the market like you guys have been. Was this always sort of the plan, or do you think this is where the config management space is going to go in the automation space, to be able to actually include security as sort of a core part of the product?
I'm not entirely sure that the entire configuration industry is going to follow. I mean, you ask if that's part of the plan. I mean, if I go back to when I first started developing Salt, I'll be completely honest, configuration management wasn't the first thing I was looking for. The first thing I wanted to do was build a high-speed remote execution infrastructure, because I wanted to be able to gather information about an infrastructure, make decisions, and then make changes to that infrastructure based on what it currently looks like. Configuration management almost became a distraction from that core motive that we had. But subsequently, we created a component of our company that was extremely powerful, but it ended up being on the flag, so to speak, of what we did for many years. As we move into security, I feel like we're actually fulfilling the original vision of SALT, that we're actually coming back and saying that we need to be able to take the fundamental tools that we've built and apply them to specific problems. As we move forward and we deepen our footprint in security, and we've got a lot coming to enhance what we're doing in security, we're not going to be neglecting our current customers in configuration management or our current users in configuration management. We can't do what we're doing in security if we were to neglect that aspect of our business. But also, there are other areas where that core paradigm of being able to get real-time data from an extensive infrastructure, bring that information back, make decisions on that data, and then enact change. That paradigm is what scales, and that's really at the heart of what we're doing. And that's also our fundamental differentiator from everybody else inside of the configuration management ecosystem.
Interesting. That really rings true. It's interesting how you've looked at that. So then one question I have related to this, you were earlier saying, let me see if I can get this right. You were talking about your sense of thinking about things is the try to get this thought together. Sorry, being able to come into an enterprise and secure things. An automation package can only go so far. I think your line was that the people who are there in the infrastructure side who have experience with it are the ones who are able to really say the way things should be and then be able to execute on that. So does that mean that you see yourself, our SaltStack as a tool coming into an environment that has a I don't want to say sophisticated, but an experienced team of InfoSec professionals? Or do you focus more on that than maybe a more green team or a newer company or an SMB? Sort of, where's your sort of focus around those type of things?
I really wish that I had the luxury of being able to focus on only one of those at a time. It's really interesting because, I mean, we come back and since we have customers, and we've got a lot of customers, particularly in banking, and we've got a lot of customers in finance, as well as very large e-retailers and the like. It would be easier for us to come back and say, hey, we're going to focus on, here's a very prescriptive course for a team that doesn't have a complicated InfoSec team. But at the same time, we've got customers that are coming back and saying, we do have a complicated InfoSec team, and we need these additional features. And it's forced us, and this is one of the reasons, to be perfectly honest, I wanted this product to come out sooner. And this was one of the things that kind of delayed us, but at the same time made a stronger product. We really had to take both approaches. We had to figure out how to create a system that is both easy to use in that we don't need a hardened InfoSec team, but still presents the flexibility that means that it can solve the needs of our existing customers, which are these extremely large, extremely complicated systems. And so that's where we go back into the fact that we've built a policy-driven approach that allows a person to create a policy that, if they want, can very easily drive towards an auditor, and that a less sophisticated InfoSec team in a smaller company can get a lot out of it, but still presenting the flexibility that more complicated teams need in being able to come in and customize what those scans look like, augment what they have and can present, so that they can be able to adhere to those more complicated policies. And so, no, that's been a huge challenge for us, and I feel like we've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, that's been one of those challenges in most organizations, right? When you have all the capabilities at your fingertips, right? You can automate a lot. You know, your whole closing the loop activity here is something that I've been pounding the drum on for a long time, because I knew automation was going to get us through aspects of the skills shortage, right, in our industry. But I always said there was a level of trust that had to be instilled in the products before we were going to automate everything. And some organizations will decide to automate more remediation activities, others won't. So having that flexibility of what you can do on both sides of the equation, right? The smaller guys who don't have the resources that need some additional automation, the big boys who will automate some things but may not automate other things. It's a delicate balance when you're dealing with those two levels of maturity in a single product. And what I like about what you guys have done is it appears that you've accounted for both sides of that equation, which is difficult. Give the mature companies the capabilities if they want to use it, they may not. And for the smaller companies, make it as easy as possible.
And I love what you said there about trust. See, we tend to look at these things from a pure technical perspective, right? How do I build the capabilities to satisfy these specific needs? But really, what we need to do is to instill trust. And the way that we instill trust is by facilitating communications, by helping people build legitimate relationships in how they solve problems. And so, what we're trying to do in this product, and what we're trying to do at SaltStack, is facilitate a stronger relationship in a very fundamental way with the security teams and the operations teams, so that that relationship is something that our products hopefully help bolster. Because if we can create trust between teams, then that really, when we dig down, that I feel is a significant part of what is slowing down our ability to secure infrastructure, is that the operations team doesn't necessarily trust what the security team's telling them and vice versa. If we can give them the same pane of glass and say that you guys are working together on this, then hopefully we can not only give them the tools of flexibility between a big org and a small org, but we can give them a platform of communication. And that is, again, that's the fundamental problem that we need to solve to be able to create security, is that we can figure out a way for these guys to get along. And waving a flag and saying, well, why can't we all just get along, isn't good enough. We have to build common ground between different teams. And that is what brings them together, is that they have a common forum and a common mechanism to work together to solve a common goal, as opposed to making chunks of that goal happen in different, disparate ways where there are vast disagreements. Sorry if I pontificated a little too much there.
No. You're perfect, because this is the thing I've been talking about for 2+ years now. The integration of the promise that DevSecOps isn't going to happen without communication between development, operations, and security, and the ability to trust each other with an integrated set of tools that everybody can rely on to help drive the promise of DevSecOps. It'll never happen without those components. And your point is exactly right on. Communication, establish trust, bring everything together. Security thinks that they're going to sit on the sideline and do this after the fact and create DevSecOps. No way. That security stuff has to be integrated into the development and the operational tools in order to succeed. And I think you give them a potential platform here to make DevSecOps viable. And that's a big hurdle for us in the industry right now.
It is, and thank you for that. That's very well stated.
Yeah, I think I would build on that by saying that what Matt was really highlighting was that participatory aspect. That security has to actually be in the game, so to speak, with that DevOps team. And what was neat listening to this is that you were talking about abstractions for the configuration management side of things, but it's one success already just to be able to improve configuration management. But then when you start to get inundated with, here's a policy violation, here's another policy violation, here's just more data, here's just more and more data, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. So it sounds like you've also managed to have that abstraction layer for consuming and responding to all this data, so you can work with those SMBs, large financial customers, and it just kind of really is more flexible to who that end consumer is, or who's consuming this data as well. So that's what really stood out to me as I was listening to this conversation.
Yeah, no, and again, that's very well stated. It's an incredible challenge, but as we move forward and in the world of infrastructure that we're dealing with, it's just getting more and more complicated. A lot of the new tools that are coming out that simplify infrastructure are also fundamentally making it more complicated. There's just, we constantly are being asked to juggle more balls at the same time, but we need to be able to figure out what are the ways that we simplify this increasing complicated systems. And so how you're saying this is exactly right. We have to figure out not only how we abstract the lower level components of how work is done on a system level, but we have to also tie that directly into abstracting how that's done on a human level.
Yeah, I think I've got one last question I wanted to touch on a little bit that I mentioned in the intro, that getting the Octoverse Award for the most unique contributors. And I wanted to say, up front that I think gives a good support. It sends the message that you actually have been embracing a tool that people need, but also a tool that people feel like they're contributing to, they're improving and making work to the context of their environment. I was just curious if you could talk a little bit what it was like to work with so many unique contributors on an open source project like that.
That's
Probably a
it's
longer
interesting.
conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother ball of wax there. But it is an absolute pleasure to be able to work with so many people. It's really fascinating to be able to get so many ideas back. And this goes back into one of my core beliefs around building SaltStack, is that I feel very strongly that I may be a smart guy, but my intelligence exists inside of its own scope, and that everyone brings a unique view, a unique experience, and their own data set to the problem. And that for us to figure out how to solve these overly complicated problems, we have to start with the community approach. We have to start with an approach that says that we're geared fundamentally towards deriving what is really going on in a broad ecosystem, so that we can make those difficult decisions about how to abstract things that work in a really good way. And this is one of the huge benefits that we get from a community. Those contributions and those conversations give us a very unique insight into how the infrastructure of the world is being managed. And I feel like that is an insight that's a very human insight. It's not an insight that I think we can gain with things like current artificial intelligence data and a lot of the data aggregation that we currently do. We have to sit down and very carefully communicate with people, work with people, and understand their needs so that we can achieve flexibility. And so again, that was one of the core goals of SALT, was to not only make a useful platform, but to make a platform that begs the question, how can we do this better? And how can we learn from what's going on so that we can do it better? One of the big challenges with a big community is, if anything, we're overwhelmed by excellent ongoing feedback and communication that still is a challenge to keep up with today.
Yeah, I love that message. And for me, it comes back around to the idea of empathy for what are the problems developers, DevOps teams are trying to solve, and how can we solve that with them? John, Matt, any final thoughts or last questions?
I'm good.
I think for me that really resonates, that same point. I think a ton of us have been talking about this recently. I guess, Tom, the one thing I'd leave you with is, can you think of any sort of recommendations to our listeners on what have you seen work? How do you break down that barrier between those two teams? Any sort of 30-second help folks sort of how do they get people to do this more efficiently?
Really, the success in breaking that down has come, in my opinion, from finding common working ground. You overcome relationship challenges by working together on a day-to-day basis. If we can find ways that we are working together and we're kind of sharing the same hard jobs, then communication and collaboration become a natural byproduct. If we push communication and collaboration from the top down, then it becomes onerous and annoying. But if it's done through sharing tasks, then it becomes easy.
Well said.
That's I think that's a great message to end on. And I want to thank you again, Thomas. That was a great conversation, and I really love what the SaltStack SecOps is doing right now.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have me. Thank you for letting me come on your show.
Fantastic. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to cover the news for this week.